For me, I feel that our legislators our Republican legislators have had too long of the ability to draw the maps that they want, that keeps them in the seats for that time, and that's why we saw the congressional challenge a couple years ago. Legislators have been allowed in Harrisburg to cut out minorities and economically disadvantaged residents, and that has been going on for too long. We need to make sure that when we have this election, we have a fair election, someone who's going to fight for an independent analysis of our maps to redraw our districts after the 2020 census, which is now, making sure that all of our populations are accounted for in each of our districts, not being afraid as a state senator of who we represent. So even though this district right now is heavily Democrat, we're not scared. We're not afraid of our Republican colleagues and our friends. Some of them are our neighbors. We need to work together, but also we need to make sure that these districts are fair for all of Pennsylvania. As school board president, we were able to establish a telehealth program in our district to make sure that we have access to students to have availability for health care. What we are seeing in our families is that children are being sent to school sick because their families cannot afford health care. As school board president, we were able to work with the University of Penn to make sure that our schools had access to a live doctor. Even if it was behind a screen, they were able to check that child out and be able to provide them with the recommended care. As state senator, I would support not only a Medicaid expansion in Pennsylvania, but also funding that would support having network health centers in all of our schools, making sure that there's funding for that available, and that would be accessible for our families and making sure that no child is sick. Additionally, for our families, we need to make sure that our expansion for Medicaid also addresses our prescription drugs costs and lowers those costs. In Pennsylvania, I believe that charter schools, as well as all schools, cyber charter as well, need to be held accountable as the same as our public school districts. So for cyber charter schools, one thing that we need to understand is that a lot of students miss instructional days. Those are important days. In public schools, there are 180 days. The average student in a cyber charter school is 60 days. Many of those, and we still get the same bill, whether it's $16,000 or $32,000 for tuition. For special education, $32,000. In Pennsylvania, there is no accountability for local school districts on charter schools, with the exception of the local approving board. But the school districts can go, the charter schools can go to 10 miles outside of their boundaries, which leaves other school districts in the area unable to have any type of accountability on that level. So one thing I want to fight for as state senator is accountability for our charter schools and our cyber charter schools, and making sure that there is funding available for all public schools. I think the first barrier to having effectiveness in Harrisburg is actually having a representative who is ineffective holding that seat, thinking that he deserves the seat again for another 4 years. So that's why I'm running to vote him out. Also, I think that there is money in politics, as well as we heard. We do have senators that are taking gifts from big corporations, from oil companies as well, that are talking about proposing fracking in Pennsylvania, that are talking about environmental concerns with no care to the legislation that they're voting for. That is why we have barriers in Harrisburg. When we talk about the public education not having any movement on fair funding, is because the school districts the districts that are represented in Central PA control the legislature in Harrisburg. And without that representation here in southeastern Pennsylvania, effectiveness in Harrisburg, we're never going to see actual barriers get broken down. So just the other day, I ran into someone who approached me and said, how can I make Montgomery County a Second Amendment sanctuary state, or a sanctuary county? First off, we need to get them to understand that doesn't exist. And that even though the Second Amendment does exist, we do need common sense gun legislation that supports and protects people here in Pennsylvania. Too many communities across Pennsylvania where there are children and young adults dying every day because there are guns that are going through their community, that are going through their own homes. You see it almost every day on the news in Philadelphia, where there's children now at an alarming rate in 2020 alone that are not going home, that are not going back to their families because of the gun violence in Pennsylvania. We do need to support more mental health initiatives as well, because there is a mental health component to gun violence, and we need to make sure that there is support in Pennsylvania. So in Pennsylvania, we're seeing environmental impacts everywhere from our communities, whether it's lead paint, asbestos in our older infrastructure, or PFAS contaminations in Navy bases nearby. And Pennsylvania has been very slow in making sure that there is environmental rights, and that's actually written in our Constitution, that we have a right to clean air, clean water. And we have not been able to follow that right that's written in Pennsylvania's Constitution. And that is because we've had Republicans, we've had people who have supported initiatives that have damaged our environment. And what we need in Pennsylvania is aggressive climate action, making sure that we curb any type of carbon emissions and any type of greenhouse that we have resulted in, and making sure that we stop it and propose green solutions and support that through grants. Well, as the only male challenger in this race, I agree with my fellow opponents here, and also would like to say that it is not a male's decision to tell what a woman should do with their body as well. And that has happened in Pennsylvania, and we need to fight for reproductive rights for women. Additionally, for support for families, making sure that we have paid paternal and maternal leave for up to 16 weeks. And that's something that we need, because child care is also an expensive cost after the birth of the child. I'm beginning to learn that because I have another one due on April 28th, election day. So I'm starting to learn those costs, and a lot of families are dealing with that today. Paid paternal leave, making sure that there's reproductive rights, and also healthcare access for women, and making sure that the baby is healthy up until birth. So I echo everyone up here when we talk about increasing minimum wage, living wage to $15 an hour, but going a little bit step forward by making sure that there is legislation in place that continues to raise the wage as the time goes on, and as cost of living continues to rise. Because we don't want to get to a point where we're raising wages and then we stop for another 40 to 50 years where Pennsylvania once again is behind the 8 ball. We need to get ahead of it, and we need to continue to have a progressive increase. Supporting for workforce development programs, which is what I said earlier, as someone who previously worked in a reentry program, seeing the need for workforce development opportunities for people who are either returning citizens or people who are entering in vocational training, getting them into high-paid union jobs, apprentice programs. Those are important. We have a great training center in Exton. We need to make sure that our residents are participating in those programs, and that we continue to expand manufacturing in Pennsylvania, where Montgomery County is leading the way. So I first feel that what makes, just because you are an incumbent does not automatically qualify you as being effective in 2020 standards. And someone who claims to be a progressive from the early 2000s, today it doesn't carry weight. He is not a progressive. So we have progressive candidates up here who can be more effective, and that's why I'm running for state senate, is because we need someone who can actually be at the table and not banned from caucus meetings, and will continue to be banned. So we don't want to elect someone who, for the next 4 years, will still be unable to serve you in the 17th district. So why I'm running is because we need to make sure that we work with our colleagues, work with the Southeastern Pennsylvania delegation, of state senators and state reps to make sure that our voice is heard in Harrisburg and that we can have effective policies affecting Pennsylvania constituents right here in Montgomery County and Delaware County.